I don't know if you guys know this, but 11.0.7 is bringing big racial revamps, right? All the racial abilities for a lot of races are getting completely updated, changed, buffed, however you want to look at it. It's a big deal. I think it's a bigger deal than people think. Because right now, when you look at like the Earthen, the Dragthier, some of the newer races, they have really good, viable racials. But some of the other ones are just lacking. They don't do shit anymore. They're not even something you consider when picking a race. Let's see this racial overhaul here coming in 11.0.7. A little summary here from Dalaran Gaming.
Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and the next WoW update of 11.07 has recently come out up for testing over on the PTR realms for the War Within expansion, which allows us to get a glimpse at this next upcoming update and test out a couple of the new features, from brand new gearing and catch-up opportunities to a brand new island that is being put up for 11.07, plus some of the not necessarily class changes, but for now only racial changes, as Blizzard is actually taking a second look at some of the different racials in the game and trying to balance them out a little bit. Some racials are very, very popular, like that of a Night Elf, especially in PvP content, or dwarves within dungeons and raids potentially, but certain other racials like Draenei, Worgen, Zandalari.
Is Dwarf Priest like still the best priest? That's always been a thing, I feel like, in WoW. Like, yeah, if you're going to play priest, play as a Dwarf Priest. It's the best way to raid. I don't know if that's still a thing or not, but I just remember it being a thing. If you played Classic WoW and you saw somebody as a Dwarf Priest in raid, you knew like they were playing the meta, man.
Vulpera and even Magha Oryx have fallen behind when it comes to being viable when it comes to end game content, and they're really just trying to pull up some of those lesser represented options a bit. Damn. And they recently dropped
the Void Elves are good. Thank you for the 100 bits, Bernie.
Full list of some of the racial updates arriving with 11.07, likely with even more on the horizon. I wanted to give my 2 cents regarding all of these racial updates, highlighting which ones have seen the biggest improvements and which one of the few options could use a little bit more work. As always, if you want to see more regular updates for future patches like 11.07 over on the PTR, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in.
Let's do it.
So I'm going to highlight all of the different racial changes in an alphabetical order, starting with the Draenei and ending with the Zandalari. And part of the thing that they're really trying to pull off here with these changes is to help promote the use of some of the lesser represented options when it comes to race class options, in order to make them a little bit better for more types of content. And I will comment where I feel
like that's why they didn't revisit the human racials, because the human's still one of the most played races in the game. So like they just changed up the Hearthstone thing, and now we get 2 Hearthstones with no place like home. But I'm still sad we lost diplomacy, man.
Doing a pretty good job, and they're making some interesting changes, and where I feel like they could probably do a little bit more in, starting with the Draenei, which generally has a fairly powerful racial option. Starting with Draenei, their main racial that's been adjusted is Gift of the Naru, which goes from a 3-minute down to a 2-minute CD. The racial itself is a generally strong racial when it comes to single target healing, whether it is personal self-healing or outgoing healing, and the actual healing effect scales based off the caster's health. So the more health you have, the more healing you can provide to others. So technically it's a little bit better as a tank if you throw it up.
You can target yourself for this, can't you? He's talking about giving it to others, but if you're a tank, 20% heal like that, not bad.
On an other ally. That being said, however, while it's decent, I don't really know if bringing it from a 3-minute to a 2-minute makes it that much better. I guess you do get to squeeze out a lot more uses out of it, so it can be maybe potentially like almost like an extra external that you could apply on somebody. But I don't really know. I feel like compared to some of the other options we'll take a look at, they could have done a little bit more interesting stuff here. I would have loved to give it an honor to maybe have like some kind of like a cleave component to it, like strong single target on healing on a primary target, and maybe some kind of like offside healing on everybody else around them or anything like that, or maybe an adjustment to some of their passive options. But I mean, they have heroic presence, which is really the only thing that really I think makes them kind of sort of relevant, because that is more primary stats, which is generally good. Overall, however, I do think reducing the cooldown of Gift of Naru, since it is a decent bit of healing, is going to help it a little bit. But I do think they could have maybe done something more interesting with the Gift of the Naru, since they're even doing some passive replacements for some of the other racials.
Yeah, it would have been nice if it gave a little bit of a stat bonus too, or something, like healed you and gave you a little bit of a buff for that, you know, that little duration. Maybe like a small enrage or something. I don't know what you want, a small lust for the person casting it. I think that'd be cool, but you know, dropping it down to 2 minutes.
I would have liked something a little bit more interesting done for Draenei specifically. The next set of racials that's receiving a bit of a revamp is that of the Highmountain Tauren, specifically a defensive racial called Rugged Tenacity. Rugged Tenacity simply reduces all damage taken by a flat number that scales with your stamina, which is kind of interesting all on its own. Instead of being like a 1% damage reduction for physical or magic damage, to just have a set number where the damage is getting reduced.
Dude, that's really good. That's actually really good. That could be the, like, even though it's not that much, if you stack enough stamina, that could be the difference between surviving a big hit in a boss fight and not. Holy crap. He's kind of underrating it, I feel like, in this video. That's a really good racial for tanking. Damn, I gotta go Highmountain now?
Based on the raw stamina. So as a tank class, the more gear you have, the more stamina you have, ideally you would have a better overall survivability just from Rugged Tenacity alone. And what Rugged Tenacity does is it is a decent tanking alternative, mostly from a perspective of if you get hit by a damage over time effect, every one of those ticks of that dot gets reduced by 3,400. Every auto attack you get hit by also gets reduced. Every big ability hit also gets reduced, but also AoE damage and like fall off damage, all of those things, everything that you get hit by just gets reduced by a flat number, which makes him a little bit more of a tanking choice, or like thematically tanky with Rugged Tenacity plus Mountaineer for additional versatility, which has some offensive and defensive benefits, plus Bull Rush, which grants you additional crowd control, which has been utilized by tanks as well as healers.
So what the fuck? Does this interrupt him too? Charging forward for 1 second, knocking enemies down for 1.5 seconds. Can this be used as an interrupt? Dude, this is the best tanking race in the game. What the hell? And they buffed this shit? Oh my god. It is an interrupt. Damn, this is a great tank. Oh my god. This is a really good tanking race. Like, I'm not over-exaggerating or playing this up for the stream right now. These are really big things that you can use. Like, it's a big difference.
Additional ways to control enemies that control damage.
Wow, this feels unfair.
You. But also, at the same time, the fact that it's a raw number and doesn't get buffed up by 50%, I still feel like it's maybe a little bit low.
I know it's not a new racial. I for sure it's not. But I didn't know that this could be used as an interrupt too. That's a pretty big deal.
To some degree, I think the fact that it scales with stamina is very, very interesting. And for classes like Warlocks and Death Knights, the classes that have some naturally more stamina than some of the others, those classes will probably be in a much better spot to actually get value out of it. That being said, though, we are playing a War Within where we have millions of health and our characters are going to hit from millions of damage. So when you get hit by like a million hit from an ability and you reduce 3,434 of that hit, it's like a drop in a bucket.
Yeah, but he said it stacks with stamina, that it increases with stamina. If that's true, then it's not. It's going to be better.
I guess it really just depends. Technically, it does make it a little bit better. I just don't think it makes it that much more consequential. I think, again, for classes like Death Knights or Warlocks, if you're just looking for a little bit of survivability, especially if you're looking from getting hit by multiple different sources of damage, having a consistent way to reduce some portion of the damage, I guess is better than not reducing it. But a lot of the times, the danger spots come from when you get hit by a really big ability and you don't have a way to dampen it or a way to recover from those hits. And I feel like this is where that racial really doesn't come into play nearly as much compared to if there was more sources of damage that constantly hitting you, which is where that racial would get a lot more value. So this is an upgrade. It's
really good for dots for sure. It's a really good, reduces the tick every single tick. That's nice.
Get better. I just don't really know if that'll make it, whether that'll be enough to make Highmountain a preferred option for many classes out there. Now, the next set of racials that's been adjusted is that of the Lightforged Draenei, and I feel like the changes here are actually kind of interesting in fact. First of all, their ability of Light's Judgment, the main ability of the Draenei, now has a bit more scaling to it. First of all, they're increasing the range of this ability in terms of the width of the beam itself by 10 yards, and the visual size of the ability has also been notably increased. Light's Judgment also deals 40% more damage, which makes it quite a powerful hit that hits all targets around you, but now has a soft cap of a target. So this ability now has a different type of AoE scaling. With a soft cap, you technically no longer have uncapped damage, but now the damage is a lot better whether you use it on single target or a handful of targets. Even at max level, I mean, that number is a lot better for a racial that has a 2.5 minute CD. So it is an upgrade in some regards, but it no longer has this like uncapped potential. But I think it overall is an improvement either way. Besides this, they've also actually changed one of their ratios from Holy Resistance to Holy Providence, which reduces holy damage taken by 1%, so you still maintain that defensive aspect, and now it also increases your
holy damage. I mean, I guess that's probably really good for what's it called, Priory of the Sacred Flame, like dungeons like that. I guess this is much better. You'd be a better tank there, or a better everything there if you're running that because of this Holy Providence.
Healing done by 1%. This is the first time that I think we've gotten a racial that actually increases your outgoing healing, which technically now makes Lightforged Draenei a little bit better for healing rolls, as it simply empowers all of your healing to be 1% stronger.
That's pretty good. So yeah, Lightforged healing. Lightforged healers are going to be better. And then, like I said, reduction in holy damage, yeah, that's going to work really well as more we get into like these Arathi storylines and dungeons and stuff.
1% might not seem like a lot, and it really just isn't, but it is still
at the back end
value increase for all outgoing healing. I don't know if this will be enough all of a sudden to make Lightforged the go-to as a healer, but now if you want to make a healer on the Alliance and you pick a Lightforged for a little bit of damage, a little bit of healing, like a Desk Priest, for example, right? You're trying to deal a bit of damage, Atonement healing to heal others. I'm not sure if Light's Judgment will heal with Atonement, but interesting if it does, though. But Holy Providence does provide you a little bit overall healing output, which could be good as a tanking role, but also as a healing role.
Sure.
So I think if anything...
Moishi, the answer is yes. While wanting people to race change, yeah, I think they do. These are all the changes that they made are to the lesser played races. So I think that's pretty evident that they feel like these races are not being selected enough, and they wanted to buff them a little bit.
It does give for a nice, interesting synergy that works with the Lightforged Draenei. Now, the next set of racials that's on update is that of a Magha Orc, which generally plays second fiddle to the original Orcs, just because the racial is a bit more randomized. It gives you a random set of stats every time you use Ancestral Call. However, that has been changed in 1107. The stats granted from Ancestral Call are now increased by 30%. So now you can gain up to 6,500 of a secondary stat, which is a decent bit. This is
it's to one of your 2 highest secondary stats.
Trinkets worth of a stat. This is a lot in terms of numbers. And instead of being completely randomized, it's a bit more focused while still having a bit of this RNG to it.
That's much
it
better.
Now grants you a 6,570 at max level of one of your 2 secondary stats for 15 seconds. So it'll actually change your stats depending on your class. So right now I'll play Outlaw Rogue. My stats are kind of all over the place. They're all very, very even in percentages, but versatility is definitely on the higher end. And normally my haste would be on a higher end too. So I'm not sure. I think it might actually use the numerical value of haste and versatility as my highest here in order to determine which one of those 2 I'd be getting. So when I do use it myself, when I press it, it can increase my versatility by 6,500, which is a huge benefit to my overall damage. For Outlaw Rogue, if you gave me haste, however...
You stack that thing with your, your opener and stuff, and it stacks up properly, you can do some extra damage for sure, or even extra healing if you're healing, or extra damage mitigation if you're tanking. That's a pretty good racial. Shit.
Be a little bit less good, but that versatility is a massive upgrade. However, for most classes, unless you're an Outlaw Rogue, which has very, very specific breakpoints for haste, because this is a really, really weirdly designed spec, most classes will have at least 2 really good secondary stats to look forward to. Like casters with haste means your casting abilities a little faster. Mastery generally amplifies all of your basic abilities and the main mechanic of your overall gameplay. Critical strike could also be good because you crit more often.
Right, Conies,
Versatility can just amplify your damage if that is how your class scales in. So for many classes out there, this is actually a pretty decent option, because not only is it now more focused, so it doesn't give you a random stat that you don't desire, but it's also 30% more increase. It's a trinket's worth of a stat. It is very, very strong. So ideally, you could go out and farm dungeons for trinkets such as Cardinal's Grace, for example, to just gain additional mastery. Or you could play a Magha Orc.
I wonder if it stacks the right way where if you use the trinket, it increases your mastery. Okay, so just straight up. But there are some trinkets that'll increase your stat of a certain stat when you click it, so it'll give you a versatility buff. So if you do that, then you do the Magha Orc racial. If because your versatility is now so much higher, if it targets that and then double stacks it, if you know what I mean, you just get get massively cocked on versatility for a couple seconds.
His Grace, for example, to just gain additional mastery, or you could play a Magha Orc and possibly roll mastery as your maybe potentially best secondary stat during peak burst window for 15 seconds. So this one I think is actually one of the bigger upgrades that I think is actually quite sizable. Yeah, this time I increased my haste, which wouldn't be that great for my spec of Outlaw, but if I was Assassination, between Crit and Mastery, both of them are really good. Subtlety versus Mastery, both of them are really good, basically equally as good to one another. So for most classes, I imagine this actually would be quite a sizable increase. So I'm actually a really big fan of this Maggar increase. Now the next race that got updated, and actually this is probably one of my favorite allied races in the game that I played for the longest now, has been the Nightborne. And I recently switched over to the
I actually don't know the Nightborne's racial
just to give things a mix up a bit for this expansion. But the Nightborne racial has been honestly one of the worst choices ever. I literally play these guys mostly for the aesthetic because you can have the glowy fingertips, the customization options are real cool for them, and the entire like race of the Nightborne from Legion are, I think, one of my favorites out there.
They're cool.
That being said, yeah, the racial options have never been all that good, especially the Arcane possibility, which has gotten buffed up by a significant amount this time around. Arcane Pulse has been buffed up by 300% as of 1107 PTR update, so it does now up to...
Deals arcane damage to all nearby enemies and reduces their movement speed by 80%. That's the nice one. Last 8 seconds. This is real. There's a couple raid mechanics that I could imagine this being extremely useful for. Was that always the case, that they would reduce movement speed?
105 arcane damage, but it deals damage to all enemies around you. So in a pure AoE situation, every target gets hit by AoE, or just pure arcane damage.
It's uncapped too.
And on top of it, they also upgraded the slowing effect of this ability to now reduce their target's movement speed instead of by 50%, now up to by 80%. Though now it lasts for only 8 seconds instead of 12 seconds. Now, the actual numbers-wise, I think this is technically better as an ability on its own, because especially in a huge AoE situation, now you can use it in order to deal quite a bit of AoE damage, but that control element of it, I think, is what really makes it interesting. On the 3-minute cooldowns, it's kind of lengthy. Honestly, I would probably lower it down to 1.5, just because it feels more like a utility ability rather than...
I agree. The arcane damage is fine, but really where this comes into effect is this movement speed reduction. That's what matters for this. So yeah, making it 1.5 would make it much more useful and better for utility and mechanics, whatever you're dealing with.
Very powerful option. But the slowdown from a 50%, which most classes can slow enemies down by 50%. I mean, just hitting an enemy with a crippling poison in PvP slows enemies down by 60% as a rogue, so that ratio just becomes less good on its own. About 80% is almost like a root type of a slow. It really is a significant slowdown of everybody around you. So from that angle, it does make it a little bit better. That AoE slow capability, which has some uses, niche uses, but definitely some uses in PvP, like let's say your flag carrier is trying to run the flag to your base, but a bunch of people are chasing him.
That's pretty good.
You leap in as a rogue, you use Arcane Pulse to slow everybody down, you give them 8 seconds just to be able to escape and make some distance while they're slowed by 80%, which is a significant drop off in movement speed. But also in PvE content like Mythic Plus, you can now slow enemies down as the tank is trying to kite enemies out, or in raids, if something needs to be slowed, you can now use it to properly slow an enemy. And not a lot of classes have a slow of 80%.
Yeah, 80% is pretty big. That's the thing that they increased about it. That's nice. By the way, I see a lot of people trying to enter the giveaway. You get 1 point per hour of viewing this shitty stream. So type !points to see how many points you currently have. And then once you have at least one, you can type !enter space 1. Would give you that 1 entry in. If you have 2 points, 3 points, you can continually enter. Every time you get a point, you can enter. If you have 10 points, you could type !enter space 10 and enter 10 times.
Like that slow has some uses here and there. Yeah. I would have loved maybe for this to be a much shorter cooldowns, because it's just the damage is, I guess it's a little better, but it feels more like a slowing effect more than anything. And I think a shorter cooldown, I think, would make it a little bit better, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, shorter cooldown
also,
for sure.
I would love for cantrips to be something that all of your group members can access, because you're basically going to drop down mailbox for yourself at any time you want to, but no one else can see it or access it. I would have loved for cantrips, whatever you make your Eldritch.
This was much more useful before all the Brutosaur shit happened. That's for sure. But this is still cool. I mean, you can drop this where you can't drop a mount, right? So that's nice. But yes, making it available to everybody in your group, that would make this a very good utility. I would be looking for Nightborne whenever I got to get something done.
War for other players to be able to see it and be able to interact with it, so you could place a mailbox as a racial. I think it would have been an awesome quality of life
that would have been
adjustment.
really cool.
Now the next set of racial that got buffed up quite a bit is actually that of a Void Elf, and they made it a lot better than where it was. So the Void Elf racials are going to be two racials specifically that got changed up. The first one being the active ability of Spatial Rift, which is where you get to tear a rift into space, where you basically...
Weren't the Void Elf racials already pretty good? This
sent out this crawling, shadowy image that allows you to teleport to it after a little bit. Reactivating this ability allows you to teleport to the rift. So what they did is they increased the movement speed of this rift at the movement speed it travels by 80%, so you can reach its targets quicker. The duration...
This is basically like that the Warlock teleport gate, you know, when you can click and you use the toy and you go from one spot to another. That's essentially what this is, but only the Void Elf who casted it can use it. But still, it's a cool ability.
To 8 seconds, it gives you a window between where you can teleport to it, and maximum range of the ability also increased by 35 yards. This doesn't show up in the actual tooltip, but it is there. And what it is essentially does is it allows you to get a little bit extra movement speed. You could see it.
Wow, it's much faster.
And it looks a little different. You could port to it. It's a little bit better as a movement skill in order to be able to escape enemies or be able to reposition.
Yeah, because it's faster, you can legitimately use this to avoid mechanics in raid, to get away in PvP. Like that's actually a pretty good buff to this.
We can utilize multiple times within PvE content and PvP content, primarily as an escape tool, but sometimes as an additional mobility tool. Though there are some better alternatives for it, but it's more of a defensive tool and actually quite good in PvP. The fact that it travels a little quicker, has a bit of a better range, 8 seconds of a duration to it, I think makes it slightly better overall as a mobility ability. 3-minute cooldown on it still makes it super niche in usages. This is why it feels like it's a defensive ability more than anything. Would have loved to see a shorter cooldown on it, personally.
I see it as a defensive ability or survivability ability, right? In raid, you can use it to survive, and in PvP, you can use it as a defensive kind of. That's what I see.
But this is at least a better usage of the spatial rift
imagine it used offensively.
However, where the fun begins is in the passive one of Entropic Embrace passive, which has been adjusted with its proc rate. Apparently made a little bit better, though they didn't really go into details.
Entropic Embrace already made like Void Elves one of the best caster races. Like if you played a mage, you wanted to play Void Elf because of this. Now it got buffed or something. Causes your damage and healing effects to deal an additional 5%.
Actually, how much better? But now the passive will increase your healing and damage done by 5% instead of duplicating your damage, which was a weird quad formula they had to utilize that didn't really result in that big of a gain on damage. But instead, it just grants you a buff of 5% more damage or healing for 12 seconds. So it's kind of essentially a big burst window. Now, this actual racial is potentially could be a very powerful option, but it really all depends on how often it procs. As whenever, let's say, you have peak burst available and Entropic Embrace activates, the amount of damage you could potentially do during that very short window could be incredibly good. Yeah. Because there's a lot of burst classes out there.
Certainly with that, and then you get like some kind of buff, like a lust buff or something. Yeah, you could pump pretty hard.
Most classes play around burst windows and burst damage and burst abilities. Like majority of casters, majority of melee play around big burst windows. And if you can have this racial activate during those windows, 5% more damage while your peak capacity burst could be incredibly good.
Really good.
Again, all depends how often the racial procs. Now that I've adjusted it, again, would have loved if they went into details as to what the actual adjustment was to its proc rate. And up next, we have the Vulpera, which, depending on who you are, this is actually a popular choice among certain...
There's already too many Vulpera in the game. Why are they doing this? Jesus Christ. All right, fucking Moon Guard's gonna be
circles a while, but when it comes to end game, I could see it. Technically, I always like Nose for Trouble ability because it's a decent tanking racial, and it actually gains quite a lot of value.
No, Vulpera tanks. Come on, I don't need that. I don't need this in my game.
For most tanks when they can play a Vulpera. The racial, they're really...
Now everyone in fucking chat's going to keep telling me turn my Blood DK into a Vulpera, and there's going to be actual reason behind it. This is fucking horrible. This is really bad. I don't appreciate this at all.
Really highlighted here is the Bag of Tricks ability, which allows you to pull up a chosen trick out of your bag. If you're highlighting an enemy or targeting an enemy, you deal damage to them. If you're targeting an ally, you heal them, but they wanted to make this ratio a little bit better specifically. So Bag of Tricks healing and damage is being increased by 40%. So on a max level character, this damage is being upscaled to about...
Pull your chosen trick from the bag, use it on enemy target. Enemies take 173k damage and are snared by 80%. Shit. While allies are healed for 260k and move 20%. Damn it. That's a good ratio.
260 over heal or 175,000 damage, which is actually a fairly solid number on an instant cast ability with a 1.5 minute cooldown. However, they wanted to make it even better because Bag of Tricks now decreases enemy movement speed by 80% for 4 seconds if you use it on an enemy, or grants an ally 20% movement speed for 4 seconds, which makes it a very interesting choice.
That's pretty darn good.
So now if, let's say, you want to be able to grant yourself or an ally movement speed, if you use the Bag of Tricks ability, if you use it on yourself, that movement speed could actually be quite a significant gain. Depending on the
that's pretty nice if you're playing, a class that's highly immobile, like a Blood Death Knight. Shit. Yeah, it's actually really good for a DK. This makes me upset.
But PvE content, PvP content.
Time for Sam to race change, the Big Bull, or Small Fox. Yeah, Furicus returns soon. I knew this was going to happen.
There's a lot of usages for additional movement speed, but also the heal itself, the number by itself, is not the worst at the same time. Plus a 1.5 minute cooldown can only make it even better. Like the fact that it's a short CD allows you to actually get a lot of uses out of it, and that's slow by 80%. We talked before with Nightborne how it's almost like a root-like slow to a certain extent, and being able to single target almost root a singular enemy is actually kind of decent. In fact, it's a significant amount of a slow that you are going to notice, and it is going to make a bit of an impact in situations where a slow is necessary. So I think this is actually a very, very good change, and having it on a 1.5 minute cooldown, which it's always been from the get-go, makes it a very, very usable racial. And I would love to see some of the 3 minute racials and 2 minute racials.
I hope the other one's not good.
Brought down a little bit, like some of the ones we talked about earlier. Now, another set of racials that's seen a significant upgrade is that of the Worgen, which have access to a human form, but also a Worgen form. Right. And when it comes to the changes coming out in...
It would be really cool if while in human form, you get the human racials, so you could have the double Hearthstone, but then when you're in Worgen form, you get the Worgen. It'd kind of be cool.
07,
it'd be OP.
One of the things they're adding is the Arathi ears for the humans and Kulturans. And I guess we find out as of this week that apparently this applies for the human Worgen as well. You can see the Arathi pointed ears.
Yep.
I don't think the Arathi have any Worgen among them, but it is still really, really cool that at least there's more customization options being added for more options than before. So this is something that is really, really
I would actually think that the Arathi as a race would find the Worgen to be like blasphemous. They would not be into that at all, and I think they would not like Worgens being part of their, society.
As for the actual Worgen racials,
they're not really inclusive.
Too many changes.
They're not about that all-inclusiveness, I would say.
When it comes to actual combat ratios, they still have Flare, which grants them a little bit more skinning. They have Viciousness, which grants a critical strike, a reduction, shadow and nature damage reduction. Primarily what they're trying to do is change up the way that Dark Flight functions, not really changing the actual movement speed, but rather how it stacks up with other movement speeds. Basically, Dark Flight will be able to stack with other movement speed effects. And I'm just thinking to myself,
so if you're a rogue then, and you do your dash with this Dark Flight, you'll be flying. That's pretty damn good.
How was this not a thing before? So if you're sprinting as a rogue, as a Worgen, and you press Dark Flight, because your sprint has a higher movement speed than Dark Flight basically did nothing. So it had very limited uses for it. But now if you are sprinting or using any movement speed abilities and you use Dark Flight, apparently those will now stack together. So potentially it should give Worgen some of the best movement speed in the game. Especially if you got Cheetah and Darkflight happening all at the same time. Yeah, it does seem like it actually stacks up. It is a noticeable change
pretty good
in terms of movement speed. So ideally, if you're a Worgen...
That gives good mobility. Nice. It's a good quality change for if you're trying to get away or get around in PvP or escape a mechanic in Raid.
As a rogue, With 100% movement speed while sprinting, you should technically be able to achieve the fastest movement speed available outside of just playing a Demon Hunter or a Monk, for instance. So this is a decent update. Overall, I actually like this a lot because mobility can be huge within PvP situations, within dungeons, within raids. Mobility can help you escape certain...
Yeah, it basically makes the racial that was completely useless to being useful now.
Enemy mechanics and boss mechanics that normally you would have a harder time getting out of. So Dark Flight on a 2-minute cooldown, I think is actually... it's a pretty decent upgrade in my opinion. I don't think it's going to be enough to make everybody swap over to Worgen all of a sudden, but if you do choose to play Worgen and you do play it in like some of the more competitive content, that extra mobility can help you get in and out of places, and this could be amazing for playstyles like Warlocks and Death Knights, for instance, that just don't start out with a great amount of mobility. I guess technically Death Knights can always play Rite of the Apocalypse, but with how many Frost Death Knights that are Deathbringer, that Dark Flight will actually gain quite a bit of value in that regard specifically. And the last set of racials we could talk about is that of the Zandalari, which has seen quite a number of adjustments that should hopefully make him a little bit more...
How were the Zandalari racials before? I don't really know.
Playable. First things first, Regenerating sees a significant set of changes. Normally this racial, it is something that you can use, but only as long as you don't take any damage from any ability. Because getting hit by an attack, or even if a dot ticks down on you, this ability gets cancelled immediately. The change regenerates so it no longer cancels.
So it no longer cancels. Okay, so what does this regenerate? 50% of your maximum health over 6 seconds, interrupted by direct damage.
The change regenerates so it no longer cancels two periodic effects. So if you, let's say, get dotted up by another player in PvP and you get to run away and you need a heal, or let's say if you are able to, let's say you get dotted by a boss and you need a heal in the moment, but you're not the one currently getting tanked by the boss, if you just need a quick heal, this will get you to generate healing, even if you have a periodic effect on your character. So that makes it a little bit more usable within PvE content. Still not great for a tank, but if you're a healer,
like I said, you can't use it as a tank. You can't use it. You're taking direct damage all the time. It's completely useless.
Yes, that isn't constantly taking aggro, and if you could escape actually getting attacked regularly, being able to pick up a quick heal every 3 minutes is not the worst. However, because of the increased usability of regenerating, they're also reducing its overall healing from 100% of your max health over 6 seconds
100%.
down to 50, which is still a very solid heal. Half your health in a 3-minute cooldown is a pretty decent defensive, like if you just need survivability at all costs, this is a decent choice. However, another thing they also decided to update is the embrace of the lower racial ability, which allows you to, as Zandalari, if you're actually hanging around on the main pyramid of Zandalari, if you carefully notice on the sides of the actual pyramid, you'll notice that there's a lot of shrines to a variety of different loa. Like this would be a shrine to Kimball, and it allows you to use the embrace ability to then embrace Kimball, which can change your racial passive. Normally, Zandalari start with the Embrace of Paku, which allows your abilities to randomly grant you 4% critical strike chance for 12 seconds, which is a standard option that many players will just stick with because it's pretty good for all classes. But you could actually change it, and depending on which lower you have, and if you are aware of what their abilities are, and you get a bit of a preview when you walk up to them. But all of these lower racials do change your actual proc rates into another effect, either a healing effect, damage effect, or a mix of both, depending on the loa. So they actually ended up changing up some of these loa that you can embrace, with Paku being one, or rather Kimball being one of them. With Embrace of Kimball,
so what does he do? Your damage abilities have a chance to cause the target to bleed for 1.9k over 6 seconds. This effect stacks up to 3 times.
Your damage abilities have a chance to cause the target to bleed for additional bleeding over time. This effect stacks up to 3 times. And I think for a little bit of time, this bleed used to count towards all effects above bleeding. So technically, Arms Warriors and Feral Druids have components that buff the effectiveness of bleeds. I think Kimball used to be affected by this ability a while ago. I am not sure if that is still the case, however. Maybe potentially. If it is still the case, there could be some class benefits out of this, like hunters, for instance, could technically do have a natural causes. Damage over time effects deal additional damage, so if the bleed does get affected by talents, a natural causes for hunters could actually affect it directly.
Yeah, that's a nice little stack there, actually. So the damage over time effect, which is what that Loa effect is now, could be stacked up there. That's pretty good.
But
so
they
I guess they're
basically
good
increase the
hunters.
Kimble proc rate with a bleed by 400%, so you're more likely to proc it, which could potentially be good, especially if it interacts with other racials. But even just the damage hopefully should make it a little bit better, possibly. Early sim numbers will give us more info if this is significant or not. Now, more than just one Loa has been buffed up, however, as a choice option for the Zandalari. One of this Loa will be a fan favorite of Bwan Samdi. His effect is to grant you a Embrace of Bwan Samdi, where your damage and abilities have a chance to deal shadow damage and heal you for 100% of that damage done. So a little bit of damage that also allows you to kind of leech damage off of the enemy. They increase the effect of this actual racial by 50%. I actually decided to go and swap my rogue over to Zandalari over in PTR. Took me a couple of attempts to do so, just to see what kind of numbers we'd be looking at, but based on the...
So everyone's going to pick the Bwan Samdi one now?
Embrace of Bwan Samdi at max level at a fully geared character, or somewhat fully geared. I'm not completely full gear myself, but we're looking at about 19,000 shadow damage, and if this procs enough, that actually could be pretty decent. The damage and healing is not super incredibly high, but if it has enough damage equal to that of a trinket proc potentially, that could be a decent choice as a Zandalari, I think. I just wanted to make sure, double check Kimble numbers, see exactly what that would look like. So then you would have a bleed that hits for basically that of Bwan Samdi, but could potentially stack up to 3 times. That does make it a lot better. And if they're increasing the proc rate of this to 400%, if this has a better uptime than what's, this could actually be really good. I think actually I'm now starting to lean towards more of Shrine of Kimble potentially.
Yeah, I think Shrine of Kimble is better.
Samdi would need to have good enough proc rate equivalent to that of Kimble. Now the final Loa that got any kind of changes is that of Akunda, which is a healer type of a racial option. So Embrace of Akunda is an ability that allows you healing abilities to have a chance to heal the target for 169,731. And apparently this racial also scales with things such as attack power, but also versatility. I don't know if that translates also to a spell power, but for some reason, at least in Wowhead, they have attack power as part of its leading coefficient. And then increasing the healing by 300% and the chance for it to proc by 250%. So it looks like they're really just trying to equalize all of the racial procs for the Zandalari.
It was more of a damage-based thing, and now they're trying to make it, okay, so it fits with tanking and healing too.
So they all proc a little bit more consistently to one another. I'm going to take a stab at the dark and say that probably Shrine of Akunda barely procs for a healer. So that 250
the other one's better.
Likely doesn't make it strong all of a sudden. It likely just places it on par with some of the other racial options when it comes to Zandalari Loa. But I'll be very, very interested to see what kind of sims and what kind of numbers we might be able to glean from once more sim-oriented players get a hold of the 1107 PTR update. But with that being said, however, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for checking out this update, and I hope you guys did enjoy it. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community for any of the regular 1107 updates. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.
It was a good video, besides the fact that my hair follicles kept coming up in the fucking chat window. I don't know why. What does my balding have to do with any of this? Jesus Christ. All in all, Highmountain Tauren. I mean, Jesus. Amazing. I am not understating this when I say Highmountain Tauren are easily now the best tanks in the game. What the hell? That was really good. And, you know, Vulpera, they were what they were. Great video from Dalaran.